but that's something we lack in. But the private sector, when it has the money and the will, because not only money, it's the will of the client to be involved in worthwhile projects. If the private sector, you have a good client.
What was your proudest moment in architecture?
Well, I think a major one for Greek architecture in general, and because I took part in it, it was great for me, was the exhibition at the German Architectural Museum, DAM, in Frankfurt, Deutsches Architekturmuseum, in 1999, when Greece was, if I remember well, one of 11 European countries from all over Europe, where we presented 100 years of Greek architecture, the best work, and this exhibition traveled all over the world, from America to Japan, from France to Turkey, and I think this was a high moment. In my personal life, a high moment was when I first saw my drawings being turned into built material, and that was a shock.
Very interesting. What do you think is biggest danger for the future of architecture?
In general?
Yes, you say so, as a vision. What?
I think a word that is in everybody's mouth is sustainability. And I think that is very important, because without sustainable practices...
Do you see it as a danger or as a
No, I think
challenge?
that's a challenge. As a challenge, architects should not design just forms, but think on the environment and the energy imprint we leave. Another aspect which I think is, however good an architect you are, that must never be forgotten, it's a lesson of modern architecture in the 20th century, is the social aspect of architecture.
And it takes more ground than ever and influence more the practice than ever?
I think it's important because architects in the 20th century were involved in social housing, in welfare buildings, not in palaces and churches like in the past. So I think
And
that should be kept.
How do you see this evolution of the role of the architect during time?
One of his major tasks is how, especially in large projects, is how to cooperate with other disciplines. If you see large buildings and large developments,
Yes,
that you see
the
all
level
over
of
the world,
complexity that is...
the level of complexity requires an orchestration, building management,
Yes.
that brings together very, very different things. And that's
And how
Very important.
this complexity, because if we take cathedrals, for instance, they are also very complex in
course.
terms of thoughts. But how this profession evolved from your point of view to trigger this complexity?
from the old to now.
Yes,
Old days.
from the old times to now.
Your observation about cathedrals is very good, by the way, because they were big and complex buildings. But it's the amount of other disciplines that enter now. It's not just drainage and lighting. It's the complexity of air conditioning. It's the complexity not only of structure, but of the mechanical services, what the Pompidou has on its exterior. And I think what's becoming even more useful, but also very complex, is the digital side of it. I mean, I'll give you an example. Bill Gates' house was designed, supposed a huge house, according to his own brief requests, etc., and to be state-of-the-art. Bill Gates at the forefront of technology, choosing the architect he wanted, the design he wanted. When it was finished, when it was built, it was already out of date because Wi-Fi was involved. So technology was running breast to breast with the architecture. Compete with, and architecture has to keep its eyes open to know what's happening, but also never, we should say that, in a globalized time that everybody talked about today, to not forget about context and the place and the region.
Yes.
And I think I said it in my introduction, but I'd like to repeat it here, that what is important about Share, and what I think Share is achieving and is building, and I hope it carries on in the future, is that Share brings together people, architects, professionals, that are not the same, that they're different. We see people from different countries with different approaches, and we can communicate with them and see what we can share. So I think Share as a word and as an idea can bring this together. It's not the same world, even though it's globalized through the media and the internet. You know, we can talk, you're from another country here, but when I come to your country and when you come to mine, we see, and what we first see is the environment. We see how you live and where you are and how we are. And we don't want that to be the same.
Yes, we have so much to share actually.
Yeah.
And more than experience, it is something in this sharing that it is very I mean, I ask myself, it is sharing will somehow go to a point to uniformize.
No, that's exactly the point I'm making. If you look at architecture in the 1960s, 70s, just as it was becoming popular and massive and building everywhere, it was doing the same things everywhere. And that's when the reaction started. With critical regionalism, with postmodernism, and people who were trying to ameliorate this uniformity everywhere. Getting off at an airport and going to a city that has the same big urban blocks. And I think Share is able to show up these differences, and as you say, to bring us together, to see what is our common ground, and to celebrate
the differences. Yes. What would you advise someone who would like to take their foot in the architecture field?
To know that he will have small sleeping hours, that he cannot be lazy about it, he has to be involved, that everything matters to him, the small scale and the large scale, not just of architecture, but of how we sit now, how we eat, what's the weather like, and to take them into account. He has to live as a normal person, even though it's difficult because of weather, to smell, to get the aroma of life, and to see the problems as well. You know, you build for a rich client one day, and the next day you have to deal with the refugee problem, which is not far from you, the migrants.
You're a problem solver in a way.
Very much so. I was only telling somebody the other day that I solve problems, and I'm happy that I solve them. And there is a philosopher that I appreciate very much, Karl Popper, who says, life is about solving problems. That's the whole meaning of life. There's no end to it. There's no final end. There's no teleology. It's being able to do your work, commit it well today, and to focus on it like you're doing it, to do it properly at that moment.
What is obsessing you?
What is obsessing me? That I could do things better than I do. That music, I think, is the highest form of art. That you should have architecture as a place or as different places where people, without even realizing it, can feel well together in it. These are my thoughts.
And this is your dream for the.
This is a dream to be able.
What is your dream for Greece?
For Greece, I think, and you see it again in younger people, we should get out of a rut of the stagnation which became pronounced with the economic crisis, and that the potential it has, and that's what I see in competitions in the young people, can be unleashed and realized. If that does not happen, there is no future. But if they can see their ideas being taken to a certain point, to the degree that reality allows, that's my dream, to see things happening from so many ideas I see being fermented. If they just stay in books and competitions, it's not enough. Things should happen. And next time you come to Athens, and I think if you came to Athens 10 years ago and you come now, you will see things have changed for the better. And next time you come...
Even if you are not allowed to build higher than Acropolis or...
Well, that's not a problem. I lived in London for 10 years because... And there they had St. Paul's as the highest building, and then Foster built his building, and now they have the Shard. In the last 15 years, you see the skyline of London on Thames changing completely.
How do you refer to this problem of building skyscrapers in this...
I don't have any problem at all with skyscrapers. The problem is what sort of skyscrapers and how they relate to the environment they're embedded in. I'm not against skyscrapers. I think.
Is there anything that defines Greece architecture? I mean, as content or something that transcends over time and can be seen as a...
I think a lot of people might say that what is characteristic of a lot of Mediterranean architecture, from Spain to here to Turkey, but even more in Greece.